Good evening. My name's Alex Franklin. I'm a senior consultant with a company called Cielo Costa. And my session tonight it's a little bit more back to basics, I think. And I was contacted by Aaron. We'd been speaking a couple of months ago, and back in early December, he asked if I wanted to talk here. And I thought I would because I've not done one of these before. And he said about the subject matter, and I thought, right, I'm not entirely sure what I would talk about. But then I reflected back on the previous year especially, but the previous 2 years, about things that have bitten me and or bitten in various places with regards to choices made of platforms and approaches, and saw that maybe this is perhaps an opportunity to vent and talk through some of those things of where we've hit certain things with platforms and with the limitations or licensing associated. And this is a topic that I think could quite easily be covered over the course of many hours, and so condensing it into 30 minutes is a little bit of a challenge. So it's cutting some corners along the way, and so apologies for that. But it's covering based on really the experience I've had and with my colleagues as well over the last couple of years with some of the things we've hit. And just to start with a disclaimer based on me there. So I'm going to be talking about 3 key areas in this, but I'm not a developer. I kind of wish I was, but my brain just isn't unfortunately wired that way, and it hasn't been since the days of my beloved Domino in the late 90s. And so my role is really more focused on the business-facing lead of a project and change management and pre-sales. But I get heavily involved with the lead of those projects and helping with these decisions while being guided by those that probably know more than I do. And on that note, the final part of this disclaimer, moving on, a lot of what I'm talking about here is obviously it's not gospel. It's a lot of my opinions based on stuff that's happened, stuff that has infuriated me but pleased me in other cases. And so I'm sure there are lots of people on this call that may have perhaps slightly differing opinions, which is all good. It's one of the many things on the list of reasons why it's a shame these things aren't in person, because it's the kind of topic that I would love to have a post-session beer and talk to other people to see what their views are and what they think. But for this, what I'm really running through is 3 areas of focus for this brief 30-minute stint, and talking through SPFx within SharePoint, Power Apps, and custom web apps in the experience we've had of doing custom Azure hosted. And talking through all of these and where certain things may work better than others and things you may hit. And it always starts with the same thing when perhaps customers are looking for a solution. They might be new on a journey and they're going down that road, and they expect that there's a silver bullet. There's one thing they can use and there's one thing they can bring in that's going to give them everything they possibly want. But the reality is, as most people know, there is no silver bullet. When we're looking at perhaps the custom web app approach to things, granted, it could probably do absolutely anything you want. It doesn't make it the right choice. I'd love a Ferrari because I like driving quite fast, but it's not the right choice for me because it's the walnut and sledgehammer thing. There's different things to take into consideration with this. And when you're deciding which platform it is that you're going to be using, it starts obviously with the questions. And with the questions, we get the requirements. And it's always about asking the right questions. And I've taken a small hand-picked few of some of the questions for this, obviously, given the times of these sessions. But when we first start to think about this, about what we're going to use and how we're going to use it, we think about the complexity. And now this is something that a lot of these things can differ based on time. I've had a project in the last year that started out being pretty simple. And it was very straightforward. I thought, yeah, do you know what? This is a business critical thing you need. And just because it's business critical, it doesn't mean you need to be complex. Business criticality can often be best achieved through simplicity. And so I thought, do you know what? Awesome. It's a simple thing. Let's do a Power App. Scope changed as the project went on and changed quite significantly. And it did make me later regret that decision, because I think that we would have been better perhaps with something like SPFx. Because I found with Power Apps, I'm very, very fond of them. And I played with them since the days of Project Sienna, I think it was called. I was quite a fan of InfoPath and shed a little tear when that demise came around. But I find that Power Apps tend to be better when you do keep it that bit more simple. You have a smaller set of requirements. I personally, because I don't do the physical delivery, but I use them a lot when I'm doing proof of concepts, because for me as a non-developer, or perhaps a citizen developer, should we say, I can build them quite quickly and relatively easily and get them looking pretty good. Once you start to get onto lots of screens, lots of logic, lots of linkings and all sorts of different things, it tends to perhaps fall out of favor when compared to the likes of SPFx, where you are able to get a bit more complexity into what you're building in a bit more of a rigid manner and a bit more of a sturdy, reliable manner. And complex, obviously, going over to a custom web app approach, whatever you want, it's there. But it doesn't make it right. And thinking about how it's going to be shared. So this is one of the things that has bugged me about Power Apps, was the external sharing side of things, and how we could only really use them when it was internal facing for those in our organization. But now it has introduced external sharing, but it does have some constraints to it. For example, I think I'm right in saying that if somebody externally is accessing my Power Apps, they do need a Power Apps license. You do have the Power Portal, of course, but when we're talking Power Apps, you do have those limitations that way. And it also means that with the security, it's a little bit more fiddly as well. Sharepoint is, as SPFx, is slightly easier. You do still have that slightly more manual way of managing it, perhaps, unless you build something to manage it for you. But you can have the external sharing, but the benefit there is you don't worry about licenses, as is with the way with SharePoint and always has been with SharePoint Online. You can share externally free of charge. You don't have to worry if you're sharing it with someone who's never touched Microsoft. If it's a Microsoft account that they have, they come in and they use it. But there are limitations, obviously. If you have your SPFx web part on a SharePoint page and you put in the people web part, so you have, say, staff to contact, while it shows them, you don't get the links through to their profiles and stuff like that that you find that makes it not quite there, but it is often good enough. Custom, of course, internal and external. You can have it completely public facing, no authentication, connecting in with different authentication providers like Google, Twitter, Facebook, whatever you need, it's there, but with the expertise, the time, potentially the cost that goes with it. When we're talking about supporting mobile devices, something that really did get me excited about Power Apps at the start was the Power Apps native app and the ability for us to send apps out to our people, our customers, whatever they may be, and have them locally on their device, on their phone or on their tablet. And I like it. It's all right. I have found in the past it's been a bit tricky when you have to maintain perhaps multiple apps depending on devices. I know that there is some semblance of responsive. I'm not sure how fond I am of it with Power Apps, but mobile through the browser with SPFx, it's all fully responsive and I love it. I think it's really nice and smooth. It does work very well. It's pretty simple, but you don't get the native mobile apps on that. So it depends on the use case of how people need to use that, which is touched upon in a moment. And again, obviously, custom web apps. You have all these things that I won't start to talk about because I'll quickly be exposed about not truly understanding how they work. But you have all these options there and you have these things available to be able to build these native apps and these different things that you want to do based on your own requirements. And offline is where I really do favour Power Apps, and I've been a big fan of it for the way you can make it work with offline. I don't find it's the most common of requirements these days to be able to get offline access to stuff. People tend to almost prefer that web-based approach. And it's with Power Apps. So for example, over the last couple of years, I've had a fair few instances where people have needed an auditing app. And an example of a couple of those would be a health and safety audit or a fire safety audit. And in certain cases, particularly with the fire safety, with this one customer, they needed to have a app that they would have on a tablet, and they would use it on their tablet, walking around where their Wi-Fi was patchy, they didn't have SIM card in it, and they needed to be able to go outside and inspect smoking areas and all these different things, so they needed offline. Power Apps is awesome for that kind of thing because you can have it so that you load it up, it pulls data down and it stores it locally in data stores, and you open the app up when you're offline and it can check if you're on or offline, use that local data store so that you can populate your lookup values and things like that from central taxonomies, whatever it may be. Complete your form, save it, and then have it pushed back up when you're next online. And I love Power Apps for that. It's one of my favorite things. SPFx, no offline support. It is truly web-based. it's not a huge problem really these days anymore. It's the requirements for offline, I think, tend to be slightly less in my experience. Other roles may differ depending on your customers, of course, but the custom approach, offline is possible. I believe it is of varying complexities, but in this case, I love Power Apps for that because it's something that's actually quite straightforward to implement and use. And one that I recently have ended up in quite a lengthy discussion about is the amount of data that we're dealing with. With Power Apps, I've had scenarios where we built small-scale asset management solutions in Power Apps that were probably going to be going, say, up to 1,000 items, and it was all good and it was okay. But once it started going above that 2,000 limit, we were hitting problems because people were wanting to use drop-downs in the app to run searches across a SharePoint list for all of those items, and we weren't getting those items showing up because we were going over these limits of what we can get in. It's one thing to use a Power App to push data out, and that's not a problem, but getting it in is sometimes difficult if you're looking at larger scale. SPFx improves upon that. It allows us a lot more power. We can have SPFx pointing to lists that are nice and big and working with them. So all good. You do then hit that question of if you're using SharePoint for large amounts of data, you've got the 5,000 item list view threshold. If you prepare in advance, you can work around it. But to be honest, I think I've, over the many years, been stung. And while I know lists can handle these millions of items and you can do it if you prepare, it's honest, the fact that you have to prepare makes me nervous, and it makes me not want to do it in SharePoint as a result of that. But I know we've got lists at the moment that are way higher than that, and it works. It just still makes me that bit uncomfortable. And it goes without saying, if we're going custom and we have a database there, if we're dealing with really large amounts of data, it might be better anyway. Put it in a database, and then it's not a problem anymore. It's nothing to worry about. And then you access it through here. You can then connect to it through SPFx and Power Apps. So you can mix the three together, but consideration. And with the security within SharePoint and Power Apps being slightly limited, that you have the Azure AD approaches. Not sure how often people do need to go really beyond that, but you do have the benefit when you're looking at the custom approach that you can have true public facing. So someone can open up a form and have no authentication whatsoever to be able to do what they need to do. Or you can build your own custom approach onto it where it starts validating based on data that you know about them, that kind of thing. Time and cost. How quick do we need it? If the last year is anything to go by, anybody else that works in the area of consulting, every single phone call that I've had over the last year has been something that it's not a case of we've got this project, let's plan it carefully and let's get it done in the right amount of time. 90% is a case of we need this now. And when you're looking at the actual truth of how quick something needs to be done compared to, or perhaps should be done to get it done right, Power Apps is often one of the better approaches when it comes to speed. You can have a quick to start, quick to build. It's that low code, no code approach and the graphical interface, the citizen developer approach that can do it. If it isn't too complex, you can have the Power App up and running a lot faster than you probably can in other scenarios. Though saying that, with the medium complexity or the medium time associated in with SPFx, I have seen experienced developers build things in SPFx faster than it would take some people in a Power App. So it can depend on the experience, but the medium term can be down to the SPFx, where you have certain accelerated starts as well that you can get, but you do need the development side of it, which can take longer. When we're going custom, that's what might take far longer. We might be looking at spinning up environments, and then you have certificates, and then you have all these other things to be applied, and then you have the build from the ground up of what you're doing. Granted, there are reusable components and there are elements you can use and application templates, but more often than not, that's the longer scale one. I mean, I work with a customer who they have a third party that manage their environments for them, and if we had a requirement and we decided SPFX, I know that we could have it built within a few days perhaps. That same approach in custom would be closer to a month because of the time that it takes, the lead time to get these environments spun up and correctly managed and tested as well. And testing is always that thing that adds that bit of extra time to it. but it all depends on what's the right choice for your circumstance. And then we think about the team. Multiple developers. The thing that I don't like about Power Apps is the lack of ability to have multiple developers working on the same app at the same time. Having that single approach and the locked environment of check-in, check-out, handover. SPFx and custom support co-development fully. If you're using co-branching, local development, and pushing things through and merging them in and sending it away, it's all good, and it allows you to have that team. So if you need something that is of relative complexity, but you can throw more people at it, then perhaps option 2 and 3 are the better approach for what you need there. But you may not have the skill set, so it may be going to Power Apps to do it. And then I'll touch upon this a little bit more when there may be a slightly greater tone of aggression in my voice when I talk about it with the licensing. You need to think about what we're going to be factoring into it. So getting those questions right at the start about what we need to do, how we need to do it, and where we need to do it. Do we need to connect to other things? Just all those little bits to gather the information before the decision is made, because if you have a Power App, I mentioned earlier we had a project where the scope just dramatically increased halfway through, and it was on a Power App, and it was really straightforward at the start, and it was going to fulfill a very critical business need. But then halfway through, there was lightning bolts coming down, and it was all demanded, no, it must now go through a custom API, and it's got to get this central source of data, and we cannot have this any other way. Cracking. Okay, well, you're rolling this out to a whole ton of people who now don't have the license for it, because it means you've got to up your license on Power Apps to do that. So you do need to think about licensing and what you're using. With SPFx, obviously it's just a Sharepoint license, and that does allow those connections through to those other areas without the additional licenses. Obviously there are third-party ones you might pay for, but it does take away that issue. And if I could turn back time for that circumstance, at least I would have gone SPFx rather than Power Apps. And then custom, obviously no licensing required for that. It's yours. You own the environment, you own the house, you choose what you want to do with the rooms. But that's something I have found in cases where, because I've always been so careful about making sure those things are captured, but sometimes it's unavoidable. A quick one on reusability. Reuse is possible with Power Apps. I mean, there are times maybe you could create a base template Power App. Things like, for example, when you're talking about having styles that according to a custom brand that you have. So rather than having to rebuild that brand into a Power App, and you could build like an admin screen where you put a text box and you put the font and you put the color and you put a button and you put all these bits, and then every other element across your Power App inherits from that. Saving down as a template, reuse, it's great. It is a big time saver. But you do have a better element of reuse when you're going down the custom route. In the SPFX side of things, in the custom side of things, the different components that you can get, and downloads and everything else that you can use. So if it's reusability, circumstances dictate. And then touched upon it as well, team skills and supportability. So with the non-developers, Power Apps is going to be the option for that, unless you're a whiz at Google, copy, paste and decipher as you go through into something in SPFX, which is unfortunately what I would need to do. So I stick with Power Apps to build the many things I need to do, and I leave that for the others that are far more knowledgeable. But Power Apps is great for that side of thing with the low code, no code. I remember when it first came out, Microsoft was saying that anyone in your business can build a Power App, anyone can do this. And let's do it immediately. Thought, no, that's not true. You've got to have some nous about you to do this. It can be very, very fiddly, but it's one of those things. It's a bit more. It's easy when you know, and I quite liked it because the formula in it reminded me a lot of Excel, and I'm a big fan of Excel, and I get mocked for it, much as I do my earlier statement about being a domino lover back in the 90s. But to each his or her own. So with SharePoint, SPFX, you do have some development required on that. It is code driven in the web parts, but you do have that ability to build a SharePoint site around it. And custom obviously is full on, build from the ground up, get your tools. Maintaining these, source control is probably not Power App's strong point. And so it can be very hard to track what's been changed in code within it. So maintenance going forward, if you're having revisions of it and tracking back through, is very, very difficult at times in Power Apps. With SPFx and custom, you do have that ability to track changes in your source code as you go through and see things historically and manage it that bit better. But if maintenance isn't that huge a concern, you are able to be stringent in it to be able to manage what has been changed in your Power App. Doesn't make it the wrong choice, but I have seen times where a simple change can quite easily cause carnage in a lot of ways over a more complicated app, and then trying to trace it back to what was changed can be very painful. And this one is, I will always think of my colleague, our principal consultant, who is a mad stickler for good coding practices, and so he very well should be, because the proof is in the pudding, as they say. And good coding practices are perhaps tricky, perhaps time-consuming when it comes to Power Apps. You do have limited code and expressions within it, and the review process, if you're doing, say, code reviews at the different stages of your project, it's just a little bit harder, it's a little bit more monotonous, well, in some cases a lot more monotonous when you're using Power Apps if you want to maintain these standards. Going forward to the other two solutions, being dev products and dev approaches, you do get to have those better standards. You write your code on your own dev environment, you have your pull request, you have your review, you have your push through to sit sats wherever it goes. And they do give you that ability to manage things that bit better. And when this was first implemented, I mean, much like actually when it was first implemented for flows, when we did the stuff that Josh covered in the previous session, I was looking at it thinking, my God, that is so much more work for everyone to do if we're going to follow these practices. But then you see them in action and you think, yeah, you can't deny that's the right way to do it. And it's just a bit more tricky in Power Apps. And I don't mean to badmouth Power Apps on some of these slides. I am very, very fond of it. I just think that there's a place for each of these. And when we're talking about, when I say about there, the lifecycle management, Power Apps can be a bit more time consuming. When we update things, we either have to maybe update that same bit in the app on the different environments, or we have to extract the app itself and then import it in each environment as a new version. It's just that bit more time consuming than having the ability to get your code deployed and just updating a certain bit. And gets a lot faster when you start to talk about SPFx and you have that continuous integration, continuous deployment possible, perhaps with some limitations on that side, but it makes it much easier to manage things across your different environment when you have those practices in place. Having your own local one, pushing it through, having approvals at each stage of the game so that you know that what you're doing is clean, it's reviewed, and you've got your own peace of mind as well as the peace of mind of the people that are managing this process. And it moves us on to where I did hit my frustrations last year, which is the parts that made me decide to rant at you for 30 minutes in my discussion with Aaron, where you start to hit some of the licenses and limitations with the choices you make. You might make the right choice of product for the needs that you have, but the needs that then follow from there might make you perhaps hit some limitations as you go. And it can be a complete minefield. I was mid-project when we discovered the licensing changes that Power Apps had, and then had the lovely discussion of how much more that's going to cost now that we need to license everything that's happening based on what we're doing. But it's starting with a scenario that is based on a true story that happened to me, and a discussion I had with a customer, something that was needed. And it takes us through where it can go. And so, basic terms, we need a form. It's a really simple form. We need it quick. We need it simple. Let's use MS Forms. Alex, don't make this complicated. Let's use MS Forms. Okay, no worries. I mean, you could build it yourself if you want. It's fine. But let's just double check. I mean, how many people are going to use this? Probably about 90% of the firm. Well, bear in mind, that's 9,000 people. In my real life story, it was actually a bit more than that. So there's 9,000 people that you're going to have filling out this form. So is this a one-off? No. 2 times a week. So go for it. Come on, make it quick. We need this today. I thought, well, hang on a minute. You got to think about this. If this is a form that's going out to that many people a couple of times a week, let's bear in mind, I'm guessing this is business critical. I'm guessing we're going to need some pretty user-friendly elements to this. It's got to be nice. It's got to be sleek. But you've got to think about those limits. 9,000 people, that's 18,000 records a week. You've got to think about when your limits are going to be hit. And when I was looking into the limits, I found differing articles. I found one that scared the life out of me that said that you had a 1,000 response limit or 2,000 with Forms Pro. But then I did find a Microsoft article that said it was 50,000, which is a lot better, but we're still going to hit that limit. And you've got to take into account that you have those cosmetics that people appreciate, and you don't want to underestimate their importance. No, same as draft, limitation in terms of validation and design, and getting to that back-end data as well is not as easy with Microsoft Forms, and getting out and reporting on it it's not quite as easy. So maybe well, could we use a Power App then, Alex? So we can save the data to a SharePoint list, and my anxiety starts going up about having thousands of rows in a SharePoint list. I think I believe in SharePoint, that's fine. But we also, now that if it's going to go there, that's great, because we need to start running flows against these as well. We need some automated processes. So we need weekly reports, we need notifications, we need actions, we need all those things to be done. And it will still be web-based, so perfect. Well, we can have the problematic management of lists that size. You've got to be careful, like plan your indexing, plan your views, plan this. If we did it as a Power App, how can you be sure you're not going to be sucking in too much data to the app itself to be able to use in like an admin interface? You're going to hit some limits there, so be careful. But also with these flows that you're running on the large data sets, you've got to be careful with those too, for a few different reasons if you're starting to do that. Well, okay, can we use a database? You can use a database, but if you're going to connect a Power App to it, then you're hitting another block. Because if you want to connect a Power App to a database, a lot of the time, the common things you're going to do, it'll need a premium license. Per app, £7.50 per month for every person that uses it. Or you can go per user, meaning they can use as many of these as they want for £30 a month. Now, in a small company, that might not be a big deal. In a large company, the likes of which I was dealing with, that's pretty horrendous. And so we're thinking, no, we don't want to do that. And although one of the apps where I had this problem, we did end up going down the per app route. And despite the fact that even this company's licensed resellers couldn't explain to me how per app licenses worked or how they get applied when I first needed to learn about this, I was pleasantly surprised at how easy it was, about how with a per app licensing model, it did just automatically assign the licenses to the app every time we added people in. And it was a lot easier than I thought. It was just soured by the taste of the cost associated with it. And also we had problems with flows on large data sets that we'd seen before that really did ring alarm bells with us, because we had systems in the past where it was only a few thousand records, but we needed to have weekly emails sent. So it would scan through all the items, it would bring back reports based on location, it would format them in a lovely HTML view in an email and send it out. And it was great, it looked brilliant. But we hit all kinds of issues as a result of doing that on larger scale ones. We hit some problems when it came to this little doozy here, this table that came out where we realized sort of just in time that we were having some problems because we had all of our flows running using a service account. And so it was a single account running with these flows. And in certain cases, carrying out thousands of actions at a time because it was running it over so many items. And that then rang alarm bells, thinking, okay, well, these limits, these API requests, an API request, if I'm correct from what I looked into at the time, being pretty much anything that thing does, any trigger, any step, any action. And we went into their Office 365 admin, where you can then look in the relevant sections to see the API usage, and it was just off the chart, and I thought, oh, crikey. And when we were looking at this, we thought, well, you know what, this is perhaps a good opportunity for us to push this change that we've been wanting to do, because even though it was only running over a few thousand items to do these actions, it was still taking hours to run. It was doing it, it was taking hours. We had one flow that started turning itself off. It was just knackered off. And we had to turn it back on again. And that same flow, which we then converted over to an Azure function, ran exactly the same thing, but it did it in seconds. And so there was that light bulb moment when we thought, okay, flow, everything about it and in there is great, and we're going to keep using it because it's brilliant for all these functions and these different ways of doing things when stuff is submitted. But on these larger scale things, maybe it's not the right choice for us. Maybe we do need to start looking at Azure functions, because we're talking about different databases, different data sources, and Then with Flow, again, you get into the realms of needing a premium license to connect to these things or connect through custom APIs that we were doing. Azure Functions takes that away and means you need more expertise to do it, but it's quicker and it's more efficient as a result of it when it came out. And so closing out, I think I'm hopefully not too far behind. I didn't see what time I started, but this is just my opinion. As I said at the start, all of this is really, a lot of it is my opinion. It's based on the opinions of my colleagues and it's based on the opinions I've read online. But the way I see it is Power Apps are a good choice when perhaps you're not working with large amounts of data. They're not the speediest to open. You do notice a speed difference when you're opening a Power App compared to any other comparative solution. And the larger data that goes into it, you see those little ants run across the screen at the top, and it just takes a while. So, and then you hit limitations. If you're not going to make it too complicated, not going to make it too complex to get yourself into trouble. If it's a lesser complex and it's just a bit more simple, go for it. And if you need it quick, obviously. Maybe if you don't need true responsiveness in that one app, there may be somebody that could beg to differ about how good responsive is in Power Apps. Just personally, I prefer SPFx from that side. And also, it's just a bit easier if you focus on internal with these. If you have a small amount of designated external parties that are licensed, great, but larger scale, perhaps not. And unless you want to pay the licensing for it, if you're not connecting to custom sources. SPFx, it's better with larger amounts of data, with more complex logic requirements. If responsiveness is important, so we have one form that just looks nice no matter what I use it on. And also if you want better management practices of the way you build your solutions and the way you manage your code. If you want faster loading times, because it is so much faster, but you want rapid development but integration to databases at no additional cost. And also you need perhaps easier sharing to named external users, ones that maybe don't have licenses. And the custom, this is when you need the pièce de la résistance, perhaps. You need that truly custom solution built exactly to your needs without compromise. Compromise that you might find in a Power App based on the expressions and the functions that are available to you in there. Something that is truly enterprise scale and is the big boy of everything, or big person perhaps, whatever you want to put it. But if you have the complex back-end logic and automation and processing requirements, so something that you can really build to meet the most complicated of needs and do it with style and do it with power. The easy external access, whether authenticated or public, freedom to integrate with other systems and not be constrained by perhaps licenses. And also, if you're really talking about those significant amounts of data, the solution I mentioned before, which was anticipated to be 1 million within a year, but that's still small scale compared to a lot of other companies and the kind of data that they're dealing with. And so with that, thank you for paying attention to me having a little rant as I go through. And like I said at the start, that it's a real shame that this is something that can't be done in person, because I really would have liked for this to have been more a conversation starter than just a presentation. Something that could have maybe provoked a conversation or two over a couple of beers another time afterwards, but perhaps that will happen at another date. So in the meantime, I will just say thank you very much.
I think the time for meeting in person will come soon enough, hopefully. And the old licensing debate, there's quite a lot happening in the chat. Alex, your session's generated the most amount of comments, and it's the normal story around the whole Power Platform licensing debate. And Al is quite rightly to say it's not just the cost. You have to sort of take a step back and what is that to the organization, because obviously if you are using those different data repositories, you are getting the benefits as well, and the security and the compliance.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely right. There's always the different perspectives. I mean, one way we've had is we ended up going down the custom solution to spare the cost of the licensing in Power Apps, because the licensing cost actually exceeded the amount it would have cost to pay us to build the custom version for them. So it was actually still that cost saving, but that scenario doesn't always exist.
Yeah, I know the guys from work on the call. You know, we've had many discussions, conversations around the whole, you know, should we do this in Power App? Should we do this in a web app? Should we do this in Power Automate? Should we do this in Logic App? Should we do it in Azure Functions? And a lot of the time it does come down to cost, because ultimately the customer is going to be ending up paying for it. And it, you know, there's multiple ways to deliver solutions in the Microsoft stack, and you know that for me, coming from a SharePoint background, has been, you know, applicable in the SharePoint world, document management world, content management world. You know, there's always 2 or 3 different ways to be able to deliver a solution. And I think, in fact, now we've got Power Apps and we've got Azure Web Apps, and we've got Logic Apps and Power Automate and functions and webhooks and everything else. You know, APIs, API management. You know, there's always more than one way to deliver a solution. So I think it's always down to finding the right solution for the requirement and weighing up the options around cost, security, and compliance. And every requirement is always different. I don't think there can be a, you know, written in stone as such way of being able to achieve a certain requirement, because yeah, there's always a couple of ways, isn't there?
Absolutely.
But no, that's been really good, and I think we've had a really good variety of sessions this evening. You know, starting off with Al and moving on to Josh. You know, I've had a few text messages as well, just saying, you know, the whole Power Automate error handling, you know, should really just be basic coding standards, really. And then just finishing off, that's been brilliant. So I just want to say, you know, time's ticking on, obviously. But thank you all for joining. Been a really good evening, really insightful. I picked up on a few bits, so yeah, very, very happy. Thank you very much. And yeah, thank you, Josh, Al, Alex, for yeah, taking the evening out of your diary for speaking for us.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Aaron.
Cheers, guys. All right. Well, unless there's any questions, we'll close up. But yeah, thank you very much for all joining, and hopefully we'll see you at the next user group.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Back to work for me.
Yeah, it's midday for you guys. I might go and grab another beer and put my feet up on the sofa and just chill for an hour, and then hit the sack.
Oh yeah.
Are you busy at work, Josh?
Oh yeah, we're so busy.
Lots going on. Is it just lots of Azure stuff, or you touching on?
So actually, I'm building a Power App right now, just because the team that does the Power Apps and stuff, they're kind of really busy because they do Power BI as well. So they got me to do the Power App, but it's been pretty. It's not a small Power App. It's massive, and for some reason, every time we meet with the stakeholders, the app keeps getting bigger and bigger for some reason. And then integration. The integration stuff is also very busy right now. We've been moving everything to the cloud. So.
Do you see? I'm sort of seeing, you know, the likes of Power BI sort of being in a data world rather than a Power Platform world. You know, there's lots of people, lots of activity going on in Power Apps and Power Automate, and probably quite a lot around, you know, Azure Functions, API management, and probably a bit of SQL as well. But actually, what I see is, you know, the data piece, the Power BI bit, is sort of separated. It's rare that we do, you know, a Power Platform engagement that includes Power Apps and Power BI. It's normally data modernization projects in one team, and they're doing a bit of Power BI, they're doing a bit of Azure Synapse, there's Azure SQL and Data Factory and all the other stuff that goes with that. And then you've got Power Apps, Power Automate, Logic Apps sort of sitting in another camp.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's funny actually. With the first app I built, like a long time ago, for Interpipeline, we actually, it was because it was fairly new to them to integrate them all, and I built a Power App that had like 10 flows attached to it, and then also there was Power BI integrated into the app, and it was actually showcased at Ignite in 2019, I think. My manager, Kent Weir at the time, he showcased it at Ignite as a better together type of thing.
Yeah,
it's pretty cool. But yeah, I see what you mean with the Power BI. It's even fun, even with MVPs and you think Biz Apps MVP would have Power BI in it, but it's actually not. It's actually a different category, which is funny. It's in the data category. So
yeah, that's what I mean. I just think it's the whole dynamics conversation as well. Even the latest exams, PL 200, 400. There's so much dynamics referenced in it, including the words dynamics and sales and marketing, and it's like, this is a power platform. People are coming either from a SharePoint world or from a dynamics world, or an info path or an access world, and they just use Power Apps, Canvas apps, or model driven apps potentially, although I think what I see is 90% of it being Canvas driven, with a bit of Power Automate and a bit of Logic Apps. They have no idea or understanding of dynamics. And I know under the hood, the foundations, the building bricks, very similar, and it's built on the same infrastructure. But building a Canvas app is completely different to building a model driven app.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you see it, on Twitter. You look at people who's passed or failed, and the exam revision guides. There's dynamics references in a Power Platform, and Power Platform is Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, and Power Virtual Agents. There's no dynamics, so it'll be nice at some point, for Microsoft to recognize Power BI is data, Dynamics is dynamics, and Power Apps, Power Automate is Power Apps and Power Automate. Just as much as SharePoint, and security and compliance and entitlements is in that remit. But yeah.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from.
But yeah, cool. All right, mate. Well, thank you very much. I think there's a few of us left on the call, but I
was being nosy. It was a topic of interest, so I thought I'd hang around.
Yeah, it's just I have the argument internally all the time around. Well, it's not an argument. It's healthy debate. It's, let's not do it in Logic Apps. Let's do it in Azure functions, because we know we could do it in a function and it's not going to cost a tenth what it would cost in a Logic app. So, and and it's a way around the whole premium connector piece as well, isn't it? If you are doing something in an RPA world that's talking to a HTTPS or SQL database, you wouldn't do it in Automate because you've got all the restrictions. But if you do it in a Azure function, it runs 10 times quicker and it's got minimal licensing costs.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's just Microsoft saying, "Oh, great, you're going to save loads of money because you don't need developers. You're going to have people in your business build these things, but it's going to cost you a fortune." It's those extra bits that jump in.
Yeah, the thing is though, so Chris Huntingford makes a good point though. So, a Power Platform license, a premium license, if you've got up to 8 apps, it costs what, £7.20 a month, which is just 2 cups of coffee.
Yeah.
You take into account, they're probably paying £50 a person license, and if they were to go to a Dynamics world or a Salesforce world, they'd be paying 60-70 quid a month per user. And then you've got people that got Tableau and they're paying for a license. But actually, if they had a Power App premium and a Power BI premium, they're only paying £14 odd more a month. So the cost for a couple of coffees that they're probably quite happy to go buy anyway. it's minimal, isn't it? Really.
Yeah.
But what I don't understand is, you could go and provision an Azure SQL database with 250 gigabytes of data for £9.56 a month. But if you want to create a 1 gigabyte CDS or Dataverse, it's £25 a gigabyte.
Wow.
So, if you've got a 10 or 100 gig database that you want to use with a model-driven app or a Canvas app, that's a lot of money for a bit of storage. And yeah, okay, you get the views and you get the security, but a lot of that you can do in SQL anyway. It's just a bit more development. But the cost of developer doing what you can do versus a £25 a gigabyte of data is just a bit crazy. But hey ho, it keeps us in a job.
It does.
Right, I'm going to leave you guys to it. I'm going to call it a night and check on the kids. Yeah, thank you for.
I'm going to tuck into the wine, so thank you very much for having me along.
Have you opened it now?
I wasn't sure if you would have heard the sound of a cork popping the moment I finished my slides, but yeah, yes.
Nice, excellent. All right, mate.
All right,
Cool.
have a good one, everyone.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, catch you later.
Bye.
Cheers all.